Border Patrol marched on the city of Chicago over the weekend, and federal troops could be on the way to Illinois. We'll talk about that and more on the latest episode of Capital Cast. Hello and welcome to Capital Cast, a regular podcast of Capital News, Illinois. I'm Jerry Nowicki, filling in once again for Peter Hancock for one more week. And today I am talking to Ben Szalinski about the latest news in Illinois' standoff with the feds. Ben, welcome back to Capital Cast.
Good to see you, Jerry.
So, since we spoke last week, we've seen widely publicized images, videos of Border Patrol marching through the city of Chicago, and not just any Chicago streets. It's the Chicago Loop, Millennium Park, the River North neighborhood. Chicago news outlets had video of Border Patrol detaining a family in Millennium Park, sending the mother and father to separate facilities. The mother's with the children. The father is in the processing facility in Broadview, which has itself been subject of controversy. We've seen video of Border Patrol chasing and failing to catch a bicyclist that's been widely circulated. We've seen continued protest at the facility in Broadview. That's led to 5 protesters, including 2 of them who were apparently armed. They're facing federal charges. And we heard from Governor Pritzker that the Department of Homeland Security was seeking 100 troops to the city to protect ICE and federal facilities. As we're recording, no such troops have arrived, but things move quickly. So if you're listening to this, you might want to check back at Capital News, Illinois, or elsewhere. Ben, before I kick it to you, I'm going to play a clip of Governor Pritzker talking about Trump's apparent plan to deploy troops to the city.
This is about consolidating power in Donald Trump's hands. What he plans to do with that power, now or during the 2026 elections, should worry all of us. When you add to that the Trump administration's effort to label as dangerous free speech critical of him, White House senior staff calling the Democratic Party fascist, the Trump-appointed FCC chair threatening to revoke broadcast licenses and the approval of a merger in order to silence late-night comedians, Trump's threats to jail political opponents. You cannot call this anything except an attack on the Constitution of the United States.
All right, Ben, obviously I've said a lot here. What did I miss here? You and I were in that news conference together. What were the takeaways here that I didn't cover?
Yeah, I think the big takeaway is just how kind of crazy it is and how the situation changes constantly. Since the governor announced on Monday that the Illinois National Guard has been told that troops could be deployed here in the state of Illinois, we haven't heard anything since. The governor's been asked about it a few times, and each time he said, I know nothing more than you. I'm not even sure we've really heard Donald Trump comment on this, since, or at least in any more broad way than the governor already knows. So I think it's just this continuing uncertainty that the state is facing right now. Another weekend is arriving here, and that certainly could mean more protests, could certainly mean more, visible presence of Border Patrol and other things like we saw last weekend. So it's really, I think, completely just unknown what direction we're going in right now, because we have no idea how long any of this federal immigration action in the Chicago area is going to last.
Now, the governor, you said, you pointed out, we don't know what we're going to see, but the governor has always sort of called for recording ICE agents, Border Patrol, making these arrests, taking pictures, and, not disrupting, but at least making yourself seen, making yourself heard, which itself has been advice that has kind of drawn controversy. Now, Illinois can't sue preemptively over this, but, Kwame Raoul at that same news conference with the governor, he says, if troops arrive here, then the president should expect a legal challenge here. And of course, Illinois wouldn't be the first state to do such a challenge. Before I move on too, I'll also note that Raoul said, don't create the crisis that the Trump administration wants to see. You can take videos and whatever, but you cannot disrupt. You cannot get in the way of a vehicle. Those are crimes, and you shouldn't do that. Is what the Attorney General said. So, but those type of actions might be what's needed to justify a legal deployment of troops to the state, at least as Kwame Raoul was concerned in that news conference. So, Ben, just broadly, in terms of litigation against actions like this, what have we seen in the courts so far?
Yeah, if this were to happen in Illinois, this would probably be, I think, the third national lawsuit we've seen over a National Guard deployment. So obviously we know the president first started doing this in Los Angeles at the beginning of the summer, where a very similar situation was unfolding. People were protesting immigration actions. They were, in front of ICE's vehicles like they've seen here in Illinois, and the president decided to deploy the National Guard against Governor Newsom's will. He sent in Marines who are not part of the National Guard to Los Angeles as well. After a kind of a lengthy 2-month-long court process, eventually a judge ruled that deployment by Donald Trump to Los Angeles was illegal. So set a big legal precedent that other states are going to lean on if he tries to do the same thing. Certainly the precedent that Kwame Raoul plans to lean on. But over the weekend, we saw that the president wants to use this exact same reasoning to send the National Guard into Portland, Oregon. And the Oregon Attorney General has filed a lawsuit to try and block that action over there. So, I think we're going to see the exact same things happen in Illinois, but obviously the big question is, these lawsuits get filed and stuff happens, but, does the president follow the rulings of judges? That is kind of unclear, and so far kind of remains to be seen. In a lot of ways, he maybe hasn't.
Right. And do the rulings come down quickly enough, like that, especially that one in Los Angeles? The troops are already gone by the time the federal judge ruled, so it didn't really have the effect of saying troops go home. It was just sort of, we're getting this on the books because obviously this type of thing is going to keep happening. Ben, you touched on it, but it's important to remind listeners here that Illinois is not really getting any information from the federal government on this. How did Pritzker learn about the apparent plan of DHS to request 100 troops here?
Yeah, he learned about it because the Illinois National Guard leaders communicated that to him. And I think it's, kind of basic civics in some ways, but it's worth reminding people that the governor is the commander-in-chief of the state's National Guard. So he is in regular communication with the generals who do run the Illinois National Guard. And they learned about it because the Department of Homeland Security sent a memo to the Department of Defense, Department of War, basically requesting 100 military members to come to Illinois to help secure ICE facilities. That's probably aimed at Broadview there, as well as protect ICE personnel, which is a much more vague request. So that's really all we know, is that memo got circulated, and because of the communication going up to Department of Defense, the Illinois National Guard also learned about it in that process as part of just a basic notification. Certainly didn't mean that there's any mobilization that's imminently happening, or that the Illinois National Guard would even be the National Guard of choice of the Department of Defense to carry out this mission.
Right. I was going to say, we don't know whose troops they would even be, should this even happen. So, Ben, when we spoke last week, Senator Dick Durbin was optimistic that he and congressional leaders on the Democratic side would get a meeting with ICE. What happened?
Yeah, what happened is, I'm not sure, and I don't think anyone knows, but all we know is the meeting was canceled. And we learned a few more details in a letter that the Illinois Democratic congressional delegations shared with the media that they sent to ICE's field office director here in Chicago. They had requested a meeting with him, and they just wanted to learn basically what is the plan here, what is going on, what is Operation Midway Blitz, how long are you going to be here? They had a lot of questions about what's happening in Broadview. They had requested congressional oversight, which is their right as members of Congress to go and check out and inspect what's going on in a federal facility. That request was denied, but ICE instead decided to grant our state congressional lawmakers a meeting with the head of ICE's office here in Chicago. And it sounds like the last minute on Friday, that meeting was declined and it was rescheduled to October very broadly. And we really don't know that meeting is ever going to take place. Why that meeting was canceled is completely unclear. Obviously, we reached out to ICE and the Department of Homeland Security. They did not respond. So we'll see if that meeting ever occurs, but things have really escalated since that day too.
Well, yeah, and it was ICE that canceled the meeting, obviously not the Democrats. All right, so we've talked a lot, obviously, about the Democrats because, let's face it, they kind of control everything in Illinois. But Ben, we did hear from 3 House Republican leaders. What was their message in relation to Pritzker's news conference?
Yeah, they were trying to basically blame this entire situation on J.B. Pritzker, on the previous president, Joe Biden, for not doing enough to deal with the migrant crisis at the southern border. And the state's Republican lawmakers kind of had two separate messages. One saying that J.B. Pritzker's rhetoric is part of the problem, part of the reason that these skirmishes in Broadview have become so violent. They were also trying to make the point that, crimes against ICE officers are up substantially. We've heard a claim from Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem that, there's 1,000% increase on assaults on ICE officers. And that was something that, Republicans in Illinois were trying to cite. But then, of course, they were just blaming the situation on the state of Illinois' decision to be a sanctuary state, which does not mean that ICE can't come and operate here. It just means that Illinois law enforcement is not going to participate in immigration enforcement. But, the Illinois Republicans say that has created this situation. It's made Illinois a more dangerous place, and it's required ICE to come in with these, tactics that are often controversial in order to solve this perceived problem of a crime issue with migrants in Illinois. So, they're of course advocating that the state does not become a sanctuary state, but that's, as we all know, a pretty long shot in the Democrat-controlled General Assembly.
Yeah, so sanctuary state's kind of a vague, nebulous term we throw around a lot here, but in essence, it refers to the Trust Act, which limits local law enforcement from participating in civil immigration matters with ICE. They can arrest immigrants who've committed crimes, no problem with any of that. It's just the civil immigration matters. So the repeal, highly unlikely. If it was going to happen, it would have happened already, and it was even signed into law in whatever it was 2017 by Republican Governor Bruce Rauner. So there was a bill that was at least new to me, Representative Jeff Kiker. Can you describe that?
Yeah, so Jeff Kiker, he represents the far west suburbs, and he has filed a bill that it would make it a Class A misdemeanor if protesters don't back off at least 14 feet away from an immigration officer, it seems. If the immigration officer gives that command, you need to back off. Under Jeff Kiker's bill, you have to back off 14 feet. Otherwise, if you don't do that, you're guilty of a Class A misdemeanor. So that's kind of the way it seems that Republicans want to, kind of try and find some sort of legislative solution to this whole situation, trying to keep the peace a little bit more, where there would be some sort of legal requirement that there needs to be a distance maintained between these federal officers and protesters.
And now we've touched on Broadview, mentioned it several times. Can you give us just a quick synopsis of the types of protests, skirmishes that we're talking about?
Yeah, it is really ranged across the board. There's been a lot of your traditional protests, people out there with signs, noisemakers, making their voices heard. We've seen other people, though, who've gotten in front of vehicles that are trying to go in and out of that facility. So they've blocked federal law enforcement officers from trying to do their job. That's what Kwame Raoul was warning people not to do. Then we've seen other kind of escalations where, people were outside. There's been a fence that was put up outside this facility. And then there's been cases where, a border patrol unit has opened up that fence and told everybody to get out of the street. Sometimes it wasn't really clear why people had to get out of the street. Maybe there was a vehicle coming through. But in those cases, the federal law enforcement officers were very, very quick to use force. If you weren't out of that street real quick, there's lots of videos of people getting grabbed, arrested for, obstruction or various charges like that. There's other charges, of assault where people got physical, allegedly, with a federal law enforcement officer. We've seen tear gas, pepper spray, rubber bullets, lots of various types of non-lethal force has been used against protesters in very short order too, I think is worth pointing out. So, it's certainly gotten very chaotic, more so than I think we've really seen any protests get out of hand in recent memory.
And there was reporting out of CBS Chicago, a reporter who says a ICE agent fired a pepper ball at her car, and there was no protest going on at the time. I mean, is that kind of the summary of that? What else is there to know about that?
Yeah, that's kind of, this reporter from Channel 2 in Chicago was driving by the scene of where protests had been happening. She says nobody was out there, but as she was driving by, an ICE officer fired this pepper ball that hit her car, exploded on the side of the car, got in her face, was making her throw up, it was causing a lot of skin irritation, because that's what these things are designed to do. They're meant for dispersing crowds, and it's really not clear what happened or why this occurred. What we do know is the Broadview Police Department has launched an investigation, a criminal investigation into this incident. Whether or not, to what extent Homeland Security complies with this investigation remains to be seen. We're not really sure what will occur, but, she was targeted after, a day after another independent journalist in Chicago also ended up being arrested and detained inside that Broadview facility for being at that protest. So we've certainly seen a lot of actions against the media like that as well.
Okay, so now this GOP news conference, it was via Zoom, so I'll play a clip here, and what you'll hear is the spokesperson for House Republican leader Tony McCombie asking the questions which have been submitted via text message, and then McCombie's response.
Okay, I'm hoping this question covers a few that have come in, but is there any concern that ICE is at least partially responsible for instigating conflict, for example, firing a pepper ball at journalists' cars?
I'll take that one. It again goes back to Governor Pritzker calling people to go there, show up and record, be present. If there's something going on there, why is the governor sending citizens to this site? Why is he not sending law enforcement under his jurisdiction, the Illinois State Police or Chicago Police? Why is he sending citizens into a battleground? I would highly doubt that ICE was targeting anybody from the media. They're doing their job trying to protect themselves, the facility, and the detainees.
So this news conference was ostensibly, saying, hey, just cooperate with ICE, take down the temperature, and kind of within minutes of it, we got an email blast from the Illinois GOP, just a general fundraising email, and it was selling merchandise off of ICE's crackdown. They had shirts that said, "Ice, Ice, baby, stop, cooperate, and listen," off the Vanilla Ice song from 1990. So don't know if that goes along the lines of taking down the tone, and it also kind of shows that the GOP has no concerns about this and honestly is a little bit gleeful about the types of federal action we're seeing in Chicago. Anyway, what we've discussed thus far isn't the end of the Trump-Pritzker News of the Week. On Wednesday at a gathering of the nation's generals, which was itself unprecedented, Trump said he suggested to Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, he said the military should use dangerous cities as a training ground. He didn't specify the cities, but you could guess. And that led Governor Pritzker to suggest that Trump was unwell and to even call for the cabinet to remove him under the 25th Amendment because he is unfit for office. Ben, once again, I said a lot here, but what's your take on the latest exchange? Just your standard Pritzker-Trump fare, or are we just in a new era of this?
Yeah, it seems like the standard Pritzker-Trump back and forth is the new era that we're in. Obviously, we know Donald Trump has kind of had a long disdain for the city of Chicago ever since his 2016 campaign rally here ended up being canceled because of protesters. So, Donald Trump suggested sending the National Guard to Chicago before he was president. That's kind of how long this war of words goes back. And, J.B. Pritzker as a candidate in 2018 was never shy about holding back on what he thinks of Donald Trump. Obviously, that has escalated a lot. Donald Trump brings up J.B. Pritzker, it seems like once a week, often, without a question, even asking about the governor. So, yeah, you could chalk it up to part of the standard back and forth, but I also think Donald Trump, in a way, is also acting a little bit on some of what he says because, we have seen National Guard deployments in other cities. So, it certainly seems like he has his eye on Chicago and he's waiting for some sort of opportunity to allow him to actually follow through on this war of words.
All right. I'll shift gears to another couple of stories we wrote on the immigration topic. Firstly, the state has successfully secured another temporary restraining order against the federal government for trying to withhold funds as a retaliation for the State's Trust Act. Second recent win on that topic. So, the lawsuits are just continuing to fly in relation to these immigration activities. And we also moved a story this week from the Medill, Illinois News Bureau about the Trust Act. Long story short, they surveyed 28 of the state's 102 sheriffs. 3 of the sheriffs surveyed said they would not obey the Trust Act and they would cooperate with ICE. One of them has. 25 of them said they would enforce it or they would adhere to it because it's the law, but 17 of those who said they'd adhere to it also expressed concerns about it. Ben, I will kick it to you here. What was unique about these sheriffs who said they wouldn't or don't want to enforce it?
I think what's unique is that, these are elected sheriffs, but they're also just going against the state's law. State lawmakers are the ones elected to make public policy, and the sheriffs are the ones who have to carry out and enforce those policies. So it's kind of somewhat, what we've seen at the federal level where Congress has passed laws and the president's executive branch has declined to follow through on congressional appropriations and whatnot. So that's kind of my takeaway is that there's, sheriffs out there, interestingly enough, openly saying that they plan to violate state law. The main one that's really been in question is the Adams County Sheriff that's out in Quincy. And, he says he wants to follow through on working with ICE, which would be illegal under state law. We really haven't heard the Attorney General weigh in too much on this. Other than the other day when he was asked about it, I think in response to our report, he said that he would be having a conversation with the Adams County Sheriff, and that's really all he was willing to comment. So it remains to be seen how this is going to proceed, if it will cause any problems for any sheriffs or whatnot. But, it's certainly in some ways also another unprecedented thing where a local elected official is declining to follow through on state law.
And Ben, finally, will touch on another story you wrote. Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton is running for Senate, and she released her economic plan this week. Give us a short preview about what she's looking to do.
Yeah, the lieutenant governor, if she's elected to the Senate next year, is really kind of looking to get into a number of things that she's accomplished as the lieutenant governor of the state, things that the Pritzker administration has, followed through with from their own campaigns. The $15 minimum wage that the state has, Juliana Stratton wants to bring that to the federal level. The minimum wage at the federal level hasn't been increased in, I think, 16 years now. So That's kind of where her agenda is kind of formulating from, is some of these general affordability issues that are popular with progressives, and a number of things that she's done here in the state. So she's kind of able to run on this record of saying, I've done this, and if I get elected, I'm going to do it again. So more people around America can, feel the impact of these policies. So we've seen some of that on the healthcare front. The lieutenant governor had this birth equity initiative that kind of expanded what insurance will cover as far as birthing options. That's something she wants to bring up to the federal level. But she's got, she's also come out with a few more of her own plans, like, creating some tax incentives to price new housing construction below the median housing price to, try and create maybe a greater supply of affordable housing. So that's kind of what we've seen is a number of progressive ideas, things that the lieutenant governor has experience doing here in the state that she wants to bring to the national level.
She's of course in the race with U.S. Reps Roger Krishnamurthy and Robin Kelly, who have released their own plans. You can look at Ben's latest coverage at capitalnewsillinois.com, where we also have a couple of other stories from this week, one about a groundbreaking at the state's quantum computing campus and another on the state's latest $50 billion infrastructure plan. So go ahead and visit capitalnewsillinois.com for those stories and more. And that'll do it for the latest episode of Capital Cast. I know I said last week that Peter Hancock would be back by now, but I promise you will hear his voice next week instead. For Ben Szalinski and the Capital News Illinois team, I'm Jerry Nowicki saying thank you for listening.